I always thought weddings were supposed to feel magical. Lights twinkling, flowers in bloom, laughter filling the air. Moments frozen in photographs that families cherish forever. But as I stood outside the grand hall of my brother's wedding, heart pounding, I realized that magic didn't exist for everyone. For me, it was the beginning of the nightmare. The invitation had felt ordinary, almost routine. My brother, Armin, marrying the girl he'd been dating for 2 years. I smiled politely, congratulated him, and even bought the perfect dress for the occasion. A deep emerald gown that hugged my figure in all the right places, subtle yet striking. I wanted to look my best, not for anyone else, but for myself. Yet the moment I stepped into the hall, I knew something was off. The air felt heavy, thick with expectation, whispers, and judgment. Armin greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just wedding stress, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The room was dazzling, crystal chandeliers casting glittering reflections on polished marble floors, but the warmth I expected from family was nowhere to be found. Then it happened. My cousin, the one everyone always said was so close to me, sidled up, whispering something with a smirk that I'll never forget. "I can't believe you're still single," she said, her voice coated with mockery. "Honestly, Armin probably only invited you out of pity." I froze. My throat tightened. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off, to prove her wrong. But before I could respond, the whispers started spreading. First, a few guests here and there, then more, until it felt like the entire room was silently critiquing me. I could feel their eyes scanning me, measuring me against some invisible standard. And then my brother did the unthinkable. During the toast, when he raised his glass and smiled, he paused, and my name fell from his lips. Not with love, not with warmth, but with a cruel joke disguised as humor. "And of course, we have my dear sister here tonight. Still single, still dramatic, still trying to figure out life while we're all moving forward." The laughter that followed hit me like a physical blow. Every eye in that room turned toward me. My chest burned, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely exposed, completely humiliated in front of everyone I'd ever cared about. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink through the floor and vanish. My hands shook, my lips quivered, and for a moment, I couldn't even breathe. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. My brother, the person I had always trusted, had made me the punchline of his perfect day. I left the hall without a word. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like the sound of my own broken heart. Outside, the cool night air hit me, but it offered no comfort. I walked to my car, fingers fumbling with my keys, tears blurring my vision. I wanted to scream, to call someone, to demand answers, but nothing came out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every laugh, every whispered comment. Anger mixed with sorrow until it was a burning knot in my chest. I knew I couldn't face anyone, couldn't endure the shame that had been handed to me so publicly. Something inside me snapped. I realized that if I stayed, I'd never be able to look at my family, or even myself, the same way again. By morning, I had made my decision. I left the city without a word. I packed only what I could carry, leaving behind family, friends, even memories that had once felt safe. I needed distance, space, and time to reclaim the dignity that had been stripped from me. But leaving wasn't just an act of escape. It was the beginning of something bigger. Within days, I found myself in a small apartment in another city, a place where no one knew my name, my story, or my shame. I found work as a freelance graphic designer, a job that allowed me to pour myself into creativity rather than sorrow. I met strangers who saw me only for my skills, my ambition, and for the first time in months, I began to breathe again. Yet the humiliation lingered, gnawing at me like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the laughter, feel the betrayal, and hear my brother's voice echoing in my mind. And with it came a realization. I wasn't going to let this define me. Not anymore. I started to plan. Not in a vengeful way, at least not at first. I wanted proof, documentation, a record of the injustice I'd suffered. Emails, messages, photos, anything that could show how cruelly I had been treated. And as I gathered these pieces, I began to see patterns. Conversations my brother had hidden, manipulations I had never noticed, favors he had twisted into jokes at my expense. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but I felt it in my gut. There was more to this humiliation than a single cruel toast. There were secrets buried beneath smiles, betrayals dressed in family loyalty, and I was determined to uncover them all. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the city lights casting a soft glow on the walls, I made a silent promise. I would rise from this. I would reclaim my dignity, not just for myself, but to confront the people who had humiliated me without remorse. And I would make sure the world saw the truth. My strength, my resilience, and the cost of underestimating me. Little did I know, the path ahead would be darker, more twisted, and more dangerous than anything I had imagined. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, like stitching together a dress that had been torn to shreds. My apartment became my sanctuary, my laptop my confidant. Every design, every project I took on, was a small victory, a reminder that I still had control over something in this world. But even in my quiet routines, the echoes of that night haunted me. The laughter, the whispers, the betrayal. One evening, as rain tapped against the windowpane, I received an unexpected message. It was from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The tone was hesitant, almost fearful. "You should know. Armin isn't who you think he is." My heart skipped a beat. I almost deleted it, thinking it was some cruel prank, but curiosity burned too fiercely to ignore it. Over the next few hours, the messages poured in. My brother had been hiding debts, manipulating family members for favors, even forging documents to protect his own reputation. And somehow, I was entangled in the fallout. My name had been used, twisted, and thrown into his schemes. Anger surged through me, hotter than any humiliation I had felt at the wedding. I realized then that my decision to leave hadn't just been about pride, it had been survival. He had humiliated me, yes, but he had also endangered me. I decided it was time to confront the situation, but not recklessly. I started documenting everything. Old messages, social media interactions, bank statements, legal documents. Every piece of evidence was a puzzle that, when assembled, painted a picture of betrayal that no one could ignore. It wasn't easy. My brother had built walls around himself, walls of charm, respect, and calculated manipulation. No one outside the family suspected the truth. People adored him. They trusted him. And yet, I knew I had to expose him, not just for revenge, but for justice. The first breakthrough came when I discovered a financial discrepancy, one that directly implicated me. My signature had been forged on a contract that tied me to a debt I had never agreed to. The irony was cruel. The same family that had laughed at me was now unknowingly holding me accountable for something I didn't do. I hired a lawyer, someone discreet yet relentless. Every meeting was a revelation. Each document I showed revealed the depth of my brother's manipulation. I realized that his laughter at my humiliation had been a mask, a way to distract everyone from the truth. He had orchestrated the public shame to make me appear weak, vulnerable, and insignificant. The legal process became my battlefield. Every deposition, every phone call, every tense silence in the courtroom reminded me of the power imbalance I had faced for so long. Yet for the first time, I felt in control. I wasn't just fighting to reclaim my dignity. I was exposing a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal that had gone unchecked for years. And then came the day I finally faced him. The confrontation was electric. Standing across from him in a sterile, echoing room, I saw the same arrogance that had humiliated me at my brother's wedding. But this time I was prepared. My voice was steady, my eyes unyielding. "You thought you could shame me, make me small, make everyone laugh at me," I said, each word precise and measured. "But the truth has a way of coming out. You used me, manipulated me, and humiliated me in front of everyone. And now it ends." For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker across his face. He tried to charm, to twist, to lie, but every document, every record, every piece of evidence I presented was a nail in his carefully constructed facade. The days that followed were tense. My lawyer pushed for accountability, and the weight of public exposure began to press on him. Family members who had turned their backs on me now watched in stunned silence as the truth unfolded. I felt vindicated, but more importantly, I felt free. Through it all, I learned the delicate power of silence, observation, and patience. My humiliation had been public, brutal, and devastating, but it had also forced me to grow, to see the world more clearly, and to understand the lengths people would go to protect themselves. I realized that revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from me. By the time the court proceedings ended, Armin's world had shifted. The debts were reassigned, the falsified documents voided, and his manipulations exposed to the scrutiny of those who had once trusted him blindly. I left the courthouse that day with a quiet satisfaction. Not a triumphal roar, but a steady, unshakable knowledge that I had won not just for myself, but for my dignity, my sanity, and my future. And yet, the journey wasn't over. The betrayal, the humiliation, the nights spent crying alone, they lingered. Healing isn't linear. But I had found a strength within myself I hadn't known existed. A resilience that no laughter, no cruel toast, no family betrayal could ever diminish. I began to see the world differently. Relationships, family dynamics, trust, it all became clearer, sharper. I knew now that humility doesn't mean submission, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes, survival means walking away, rebuilding, and then returning, not with malice, but with the undeniable force of truth. Even after the courtroom drama, the scars remained. I thought exposure would heal everything, but humiliation doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the shadows of your mind. I found myself replaying that wedding day. The laughter, the whispers, the betrayal that had pierced me deeper than any legal victory could repair. I started receiving messages, some sympathetic, some curious, but one stood out. An anonymous email. You've only scratched the surface. If you want to truly understand, follow the trail. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay in the relative safety I had built. But curiosity, and something deeper, rage, determination, a hunger for complete truth, pushed me forward. I followed the trail cautiously. What I uncovered was staggering. Armin hadn't just humiliated me at his wedding. He had manipulated nearly everyone around him. Investments that he claimed were legitimate were sinking families into debt. Friends who had seemed loyal were pawns in his schemes. And worst of all, he had tried to control my life from afar, spreading rumors and misinformation to make me look unstable, incapable, or reckless. The betrayal cut sharper than before. My brother, the man I had once trusted implicitly, had turned my entire family, my community, and my past against me. But now, I had the power he never imagined I would possess. Knowledge. I knew his moves, his patterns, his lies. And I could use them to my advantage. I started planning carefully, not out of petty revenge, but as a demonstration of justice. Every step was calculated. Every confrontation was timed. I wasn't reckless like I had been the night of the wedding. I had learned patience, strategy, and precision. I was no longer the humiliated sister. I was the one holding the evidence. The first confrontation was subtle. I invited Armin to a family dinner, under the guise of reconciliation. He arrived, confident, smug, thinking he had nothing to fear. I let the evening unfold, letting him bask in his perceived victory. Then, I began weaving the narrative. Casual remarks, pointed questions, references to documents he thought were hidden, they began to unsettle him. I could see it in his eyes, the arrogance cracking, the mask slipping. Do you remember that investment you said would triple? I asked, voice calm but steady. The one you told everyone was perfectly safe? He laughed, dismissive, but I continued. Funny how people who trusted you lost everything, isn't it? The room went quiet. Other family members glanced between us, sensing tension but not knowing the full story. Armin tried to regain control, but each lie he told I countered with evidence. Every attempt at charm, every manipulation, was dismantled piece by piece. And with every word, I felt the humiliation of the wedding reverse itself, not with vengeance, but with undeniable truth. By the end of the evening, Armin was visibly shaken. His confidence, once unassailable, had crumbled. He tried one last time to twist the situation, to gaslight me, to make me doubt my own findings, but I refused. I had documented everything. Every call, every email, every misstep. The web of deceit he had spun for years was collapsing around him, and I was standing in the center, steady, unbroken, unafraid. The following weeks were a storm. Armin's reputation, meticulously curated for years, began to unravel. Family members who had once laughed at me now confronted him. Friends distanced themselves. Business partners demanded explanations. And through it all, I stayed silent, letting the truth speak for itself. My revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was precise, relentless, and public in the way that mattered most. But it wasn't just about Armin. This journey had changed me. I had discovered a resilience, a cunning, a strength that I never knew existed. I realized that humiliation, no matter how deep, could be transformed into power, if you had the courage to face it, document it, and act strategically. One night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on everything. The betrayal, the public shame, the isolation, they had been brutal teachers. And yet, they had taught me more than any comfort ever could. I had learned patience, observation, and the subtle art of turning a situation to my advantage. I had learned that dignity is not given, it is taken, reclaimed, and defended. And then came the final act. I arranged a private meeting with Armin, one last conversation that would seal everything. His demeanor was fragile now, the arrogance of the past replaced with desperation. I didn't raise my voice, didn't scream. I simply presented the facts, laid out the evidence, and watched him realize the full weight of his actions. "You made me the joke of your wedding," I said softly, letting the words settle. "But what you don't understand is that jokes don't define me. Your betrayal doesn't define me. And your lies, they don't hold power over me anymore." He had nothing to say. His defenses were gone. The humiliation, the fear, the loss, it was all his now. And I walked away, not with triumph or gloating, but with a quiet, profound sense of closure. The path had been long, painful, and harrowing. I had been humiliated in front of the world, betrayed by someone I loved, and forced to confront my own vulnerability. But through it all, I had discovered a truth more powerful than revenge. Dignity is earned, resilience is forged in fire, and courage is found in the moments when you feel most broken. As I left that meeting, stepping into the sunlight of a new day, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had confronted betrayal, reclaimed my power, and ensured that justice, in its own way, had been served. And in that moment, I understood that humiliation is temporary, but strength, true strength, is forever. The days that followed felt surreal, as if the world had tilted slightly and revealed itself in a new light. The weight of humiliation that had once crushed me now felt like a distant shadow, still there, but powerless. My life, my choices, my dignity, they were mine, unassailable. And yet, even with victory in hand, I realized the journey wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about understanding, acceptance, and reclaiming control over my own story. Armin had retreated into silence. The arrogance that once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet shame that he could neither deny nor explain. He tried reaching out, apologies mumbled and half-hearted, but I had no desire to relive the past. The betrayal had left scars, yes, but it had also gifted me clarity. I didn't need him to acknowledge his wrongs. I only needed to acknowledge my own strength. I began to rebuild my personal life, carefully, intentionally. Friendships that had been tested by my absence grew stronger, grounded in authenticity and trust. I discovered new passions, traveled to cities I had only dreamed of visiting, and immersed myself in work that challenged me, inspired me, and allowed me to shine. Every step I took was a declaration. I was no longer defined by humiliation or betrayal. I was defined by my resilience, my choices, and my courage to rise. And yet, every so often, the memories of that wedding would surface. Not as pain but as fuel. I remembered the laughter, the whispers, the judgmental eyes, and I realized something profound. The world would always try to shame you, to push you down, to make you doubt yourself. But humiliation only has power if you let it. Strength comes from reclaiming that narrative, standing tall despite the jeers, and walking away with dignity intact. Months later, I received an invitation. Not from Armin, not from my family, but from an organization I had been contributing to anonymously. They wanted me to speak, to share my story, to inspire others who had faced betrayal, humiliation, or injustice. I hesitated at first, recalling the pain, the fear, the shame. But then I realized this was the ultimate reclamation. My story, once a source of humiliation, could now become a beacon of hope. Standing on that stage, lights warm against my face, audience members staring expectantly, I took a deep breath. I began to speak, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity, honesty, and strength. I told them about the humiliation, the betrayal, the legal battles, and the painstaking journey of rebuilding. I shared the lessons I had learned, the power of patience, the necessity of self-respect, and the strength that comes from refusing to let others define your worth. As I spoke, I saw nods, tears, and smiles in the crowd. I realized then that my humiliation had transformed into empowerment, not just for me, but for anyone who had ever felt small, overlooked, or mocked. My pain had become a lesson, my story a weapon, not to harm, but to inspire. Later that evening, I walked alone along the quiet streets of the city. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and possibility. I thought of Armin, of the wedding, of the laughter that had once shattered me. And I smiled, not with malice, but with peace. I had survived. I had risen. I had reclaimed my life. I knew now that humiliation is temporary, betrayal is a test, and resilience is permanent. Life would continue to throw challenges, betrayals, and heartbreaks my way, but I had proven something essential. I was stronger than the worst that could happen to me. I had discovered the quiet power of dignity, the unstoppable force of patience, and the freedom that comes from owning your own story. As I looked up at the city skyline, glowing in the night, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. My brother's wedding had humiliated me, yes, but it had also awakened a force within me that I would never ignore again. The laughter that once cut me now reminded me of my journey. The tears, the anger, the strategy, the patience, and finally, the triumph. And in that moment, I understood the ultimate truth. Life doesn't define you by the humiliation you endure. It defines you by the courage with which you rise. I walked on, confident, whole and unbroken, knowing that my story, once a tale of shame, had transformed into one of power, resilience, and hope. And that, more than revenge or justice, was the ultimate victory.